Thank you very much, Ollie, for that kind introduction. And good afternoon and welcome to this Meet the Expert lecture, where I will be looking at the beautiful, brilliant colors of 18th century Sèvres porcelain. There are many aspects about Sèvres porcelain that I find attractive. The elegant shapes, the delicately painted scenes, figures and flowers, the unapologetic use of gilding, the tactile qualities of soft paste porcelain, and even the gripping stories behind those who made and acquired these pieces. But there is one aspect about Sèvres porcelain that immediately gets my attention before I register any of the above, and that's the bold ground color palette. These bright colors are a joy to watch, and after a long and great winter, I thought that it was a beautiful way of celebrating spring by looking at the ground colors of Sèvres porcelain. But what are ground colors? The ground color is that applied over the ceramic body of a vase or some tableware, covering it almost entirely. It defines some spaces left unpainted in white called reserves. As the name indicates, the reserves are saved for more elaborate decoration that specifically is painted by specifically dedicated painters at the Sèvres manufactory, and that they would have applied this decoration at a later stage. As we can see in this ravishing covered bowl and plateau, the ground color is pink, while the reserves are populated with birds on landscapes by the renowned bird painter François-Joseph Alonclos. In this lecture, I would like to explore the palette of ground colors used at the manufactories of Sèvres and Vincennes in the 18th century, in particular, those used on the manufactory's famous soft paste porcelain. But I will also look at some of the interesting examples of ground colors of hard paste porcelain in the end. In preparing this lecture, I am indebted to the research undertaken by other scholars, chiefly Tamara Préau, former archivist at the Manufacture Nationale de Sèvres, Antoine Dalby, former head chemist at Sèvres, and Dame Ross Saville, former director at the Wallace Collection and author of our catalogue of Sèvres porcelain. Before we can talk of Sèvres porcelain, properly speaking, we must remind ourselves that the origins of this renowned French manufactory happened elsewhere in Vincennes, to the east of Paris. Around 1740, the intendant des finances and director of the French India Company, Jean-Henri Louis Horry de Fulvie, established a porcelain manufactory in the Château de Vincennes, a disused royal residence that also served as a high-status prison. This was a private enterprise under the protection of the wealth of Fulvie, and with the participation of shareholders that invested their capital. Establishing a porcelain manufactory was a potentially lucrative aristocratic pursuit, as it had already happened also near Paris in Chantilly under the patronage of the Duc de Bourbon, or at Saint-Cloud under Louis XIV's brother, the Duc d'Orléans. But the most successful example was that of the Meissen factory in Saxony, which would become Vincennes' major competitor. After a rocky start of failed attempts and financial losses, the manufactory regained momentum with the introduction in 1742 of a beautifully white artificial or soft porcelain paste. Vincennes was also granted an exclusive royal privilege in 1745 to manufacture objects in the manner of Meissen, with painted figures and gilding. During its first years, Vincennes' focus has been on producing wares that showcase the rarity and beauty of its creamy white paste, accentuated by touches of color. This 1751 Vincennes sugar bowl and cover has a monochrome green decoration known as camailleux, popular in Meissen during the late 1740s, as seen in the jug to the right, decorated with a gallant scene in pink camailleux. The 1745 royal privilege granted to Vincennes also mentions the exclusive use of gilding in porcelain, a technique that was satisfactorily developed from 1748. This coincided with the arrival at the manufactory of the Italian goldsmith and designer Jean-Claude Chambellan Duplessis. Duplessis acted as artistic director of the manufactory for almost 3 decades, initially supplying original designs for vases and useful wares inspired by the natural world and aquatic themes in a true Rococo spirit. So, where does the idea of ground colors come from? Meissen porcelain was consumed in great quantities in France during the 1740s. Part of its success was a decoration introduced in the 1730s with vibrant ground colors surrounding the white recess with scenes or flowers. At this point, the production at Meissen was heavily influenced by Chinese and Japanese porcelain with regards to its shape and figurative decoration, copying, imitating, and emulating Far Eastern designs, as shown in these two vases. As opposed to Vincennes, Meissen produced true hard paste porcelain, similar to that imported from Asia. The key ingredient to producing hard paste porcelain was a fine, white, natural clay called kaolin, which is mixed with quartz and feldspar. Hard paste porcelain has a luminous, white, translucent body accentuated by a transparent glaze. The chemists at Meissen found a variety of color recipes that produced coverings of great intensity and uniformity. They are what we call enamel colors, powdered oxides mixed with an opaque vitreous paste, the fondant, and applied over the white body. The result is that of an incredibly even color surfaces. Inspired by this fashion, in the early 1750s, Vincennes introduced a series of ground colors that covered large sections of wares and vases. Kaolin, the secret to producing hard paste porcelain, had not been found in France at this point yet. And that is why French manufacturers created an artificial substitute that produced what we call soft paste porcelain, soft or tender in French, because it lacks the relative hardness and resistance to drastic changes of temperature that hard paste porcelain has, and because the brilliant turquoise blue of this vase's body is translucent with a jewel-like effect. It lets the light penetrate in the layer of color, revealing some of the whiteness of the porcelain underneath. It is noticeable in the edges around the triangle-shaped recess. Earlier, we have mentioned that colors in porcelain are formed in broad terms by two components: a dry, finely powdered metallic oxide, the pigment, and a binding substance that allows artists to apply this pigment with a brush, the fondant. This is fundamental for paintings in porcelains like the cherubs in this vase. However, most soft paste porcelain ground colors are not appropriate for figurative decoration. They are highly alkaline, meaning that the chemical composition of the fondant is soluble in water, so they cannot be applied with a brush. Instead, they were applied as a dry powder over a tacky undercoat or mordant. In the kiln, the colors fondant and the transparent glaze melt at similar temperature of around 800 degrees Celsius, fusing together and creating the transparent effect that made them famous. These transparent ground colors were of exceptional quality compared to other contemporary productions. The problem with these alkaline transparent colors is that they tend to devitrify, to lose their transparent and shiny, glassy effect during the cooling down period after having been fired. In order to avoid this, they must be fired and cooled down as quickly as possible. This is why in 1748, a special continuous kiln was built at Vincennes, in which pieces could be fired and cooled down in the short span of 60 to 90 minutes. Its inventor was the ceramist Claude Humbert Gérin, who had previously worked at the Chantilly manufactory, improving the recipe for soft paste porcelain. A number of ground colors during the 1750s under the direction of the manufactory's head chemist, Jean Helot, a member of the Académie Royale des Sciences. The first ground color developed at Vincennes was a deep blue known as Bleu lapis, a reference to the semi-precious stone lapis lazuli. The introduction of this color has been attributed to Jean-Jacques Bailly in 1752. Originally a fan painter, Bailly developed his skill at the manufactory, and by 1751 he was one of the painters charged with creating new colors. Bleu lapis is obtained by applying powdered cobalt oxide on the unglazed body of the pot in what is known as the biscuit state. The pieces are then covered with the transparent glaze and fired for a second time. This is the only underglaze color used at Vincennes, although there were other grayish-blue underglaze colors used in decorative motifs in the late 1740s. Powdered cobalt did not spread evenly on the chalky surface and produced a mottled effect visible through the transparent glaze. It's visible here just under the rim of this pot. This mottled effect is similar to that on Chinese bleu soufflé or blown blue pieces of the Kangxi period, a technique obtained by blowing powdered cobalt on the unglazed pot through a gauze. Sometimes bleu lapis grounds are dusted with gold, producing an effect that imitates lapis lazuli, as in this cup and saucer, possibly also inspired by Chinese pieces, as we have just seen. The underglaze blue marks used at Vincennes and Sèvres are also painted in bleu lapis. Here we see the royal monogram of interlaced L's for Louis XV applied under the saucer. This became the factory's mark before it was officially purchased by the king. Lapis blue ground is particularly striking in combination with the gilded decoration that Vincennes and Sèvres excelled at. It enhances the whiteness of the paste, and it is cleverly applied over the uneven edges of the reserve that, due to the underglaze nature of this ground color, don't have defined borders, allowing some of the pigment to seep through the glaze. And some gilding could conceal this technical problem. And here we can see just around, in between the white paste and the enamel, the ground color, the bleu lapis, in that section where they meet, the gilding is sort of concealing that shade, which is still some pigment that has been gone through the glaze, so the lines are not perfectly sharp and defined. In 1753 appears the bleu celeste ground color, an invention by the head chemist Jean Helot that was used for the first time in a dinner service commissioned by Louis XV. That year, the king acquired 1/4 of the company's shares, and possibly to mark this event, the commission was placed. The service included numerous new shapes and designs by Duplessis, and in addition to its striking turquoise ground, it was decorated with flowers and gilding as seen in this exquisite octagonal dish. The name Bleu Celeste may be either an homage to China, the Empire Celestial Empire, from where porcelain had been imported in great quantities into Europe, or a reference to the sky blue sash worn by the knights of the French Chivalry Order of the Saint-Esprit, awarded by the king. As opposed to bleu lapis, turquoise blue is an overglazed color. It is a mixture made with copper and cobalt oxides in a solution with the alkaline content that, due to its high content of soda and potash, transformed into a turquoise blue in the kiln. Because it's highly alkaline, it cannot be applied satisfactorily with a brush, for it would dissolve in water. So instead, it was applied dry over the glazed porcelain. A sticky undercoat called the mordant was applied, and then the powdered color was carefully sprinkled. The result of the first layer was usually too light in tone, so 2 or 3 successive layers with their respective firings in the kiln were needed to obtain an intense tone. In words of Jean Ellot, his creator, it resembles turquoise stone during the day and green malachite in candlelight. This complex process for manufacturing this color contributed to the high cost of producing pieces decorated in blue celeste. However, the high prices did not deter customers from purchasing pieces in this color, which became one of the most popular ever produced at Vincennes and Sèvres. Its popularity extended through time and space, reaching the Francophile Catherine the Great of Russia, who chose it for the dinner and dessert service she commissioned 23 years after the creation of this color. On this occasion, the Russian monarch departed from the Rococo-style shapes that had been produced for decades and requested new designs in the fashionable neoclassical taste. Examples of pieces decorated with a yellow ground appear in the manufacturer's records from 1751, with initial experiments probably taking place from some years earlier. A homogeneous and intense yellow was a color difficult to produce, and these first attempts are experimental, usually resulting in pale yellow pieces. As we have seen before, the production at Vincennes during its early years was inspired by that of Meissen, where they found the way of producing even and intense yellows from the late 1720s. In these two images, we can appreciate how the enamel color in hard paste porcelain produced at Meissen to the left seems more accomplished, vibrant, and even than the yellow ground over soft paste porcelain produced at Vincennes in the early 1750s to the right. Although the recipe was perfected in 1755, the production of yellow pieces declined a couple of years later. We would have to wait until the 1770s to see a new production of yellow pieces. This was years after the manufactory had moved its premises from Vincennes to the village of Sèvres, west of Paris and closer to the court of Versailles. By then, Louis XV had also become the sole proprietor, and the manufactory was known as the Royal Manufactory of Sèvres. This cup and saucer, decorated with revolutionary or republican motifs, was decorated in 1794 with bands of over-glazed blue and yellow ground. This yellow was thinner than the one from Vincennes, and we will get to the over-glazed blue in a minute. The Wallace Collection has one of the most spectacular collections of 18th-century Sèvres porcelain in the world. However, this is the only example of yellow ground in the collection. Our collection of Vincennes and Sèvres porcelain was largely assembled by two people, the fourth Marquess of Hertford, an incredibly wealthy English aristocrat that spent most of his life in Paris and who was part of the intimate circle of Emperor Napoleon III, and the fourth Marquess's likely illegitimate son, Sir Richard Wallace, who, after living most of his life in Paris, moved to London and dedicated his life and inheritance to philanthropy and collecting treasures. Both the fourth Marquess and Richard Wallace collected pieces of the highest quality, preferring objects with important provenance and in good condition. The lack of yellow Sèvres porcelain in the collection is probably due to the fact that the few pieces available in the market during the fourth Marquess's and Sir Richard's time did not meet their criteria. Cunning 19th-century dealers may have tried to find a solution to the absence of yellow pieces of Sèvres porcelain in the British market. These Yuan basins were manufactured in Sèvres in the 18th century. However, they received their yellow ground decoration in 19th century Britain. Unfortunately, this was a relatively common practice. Original pieces that were simply decorated or left in white were whitewashed with the help of chemicals, and they were repainted and refired. The introduction of a green ground roughly coincides with the transfer of the manufactory from Vincennes to Sèvres in 1756. The records speak of a succession of recipes by the team of factory chemists before the perfect green was achieved, from the bluish greens of 1757 to the more yellow apple greens of the 1770s. All greens are made with copper. The beautifully even and bright green used to decorate this ball pot has been cleverly applied in a lattice pattern with gold outlines that create the illusion of depth, and it's reminiscent of a trellis or garden setting. The influence of Meissen porcelain was also reflected in the names given to colors created at Vincennes. One of the factory chemists, Jean-Mathias Caillat, created a green color that Helot described as fond vert de Saxe, a Saxon green ground, in reference to the wares decorated with green monochrome tints imported from Meissen. However, by the late 1750s, the production at Sèvres was admired and sought after in Europe, and after almost half a century of French manufacturers looking at Meissen for inspiration, Meissen started to look west towards Sèvres. France had been Meissen's best client during the first half of the 18th century, but with the success of Sèvres, the economic difficulties brought by the 7 Years' War, and a change in taste, the sale of Meissen porcelain in France declined. Meissen was put under investigation, and in 1764 it was decided to send a delegation to Paris to gather information about the rival manufactories and their successful products so that they could be imitated at Meissen. The delegation was especially interested in the process of glazing and firing, as well as in recipes for different colors in which Sèvres excelled. An example of Sèvres inspiring Meissen is displayed with apple green ground and a lattice mosaic pattern on the left, which takes inspiration from Sèvres pieces from the mid-1750s, as shown in the plate on the right. Green is one of the best represented colors in our collection of Sèvres porcelain. Some of the most spectacular pieces are decorated with a green ground. This early pair of elephant vases from 1757 present a bluish tone that seems to have been perfected a year later when this other pair was produced. This is not the only technical innovation on these elephant vases that, in this later version, present handles supporting the trunks to prevent sagging in the kiln. Green is one of the ground colors that most frequently appears associated to other colors, notably pink and overglazed blue. The pink duvet verdant to the right is decorated with conventional green garlands and bands, while the overglazed blue vase boileau to the left is covered by a mixture of green bands, garlands, palms, foliage, scales, and rather fittingly, intertwined snakes on either side of the central reserve. You can see them here. These are the snakes. The neoclassical taste prevalent in the 1770s preferred deep, even coloring colors to the transparent jewel-like effect of earlier colors. The dark, uniform green ground on this vase is testament to this fashion. So let's now look at pink. In the 1750s, Vincennes produced porcelain decorated with a reddish color based on iron oxide, but varied from carmine to purple. However, those pieces pale in comparison to the striking effect of later pieces decorated with a pink ground. This bright hue of pink is the result of a long process of experiments in search for the right tone that occupied several of the most talented painters and chemists at Sèvres, such as Gaillard, Bailly, and finally the one who was successful, Chauvet. The term fond rose was first recorded at Sèvres in 1758, although this color is found on pieces dated a year earlier. In order to obtain this color, gold particles were treated with an acid mixture that broke them into microscopic pieces and kept them in a colloidal suspension, and then were applied over the glaze. In the kiln, the chemical reaction prompted by the heat turned the wares a bright shade of pink. It is believed that pink presented a particular problem when gilded decoration was applied over it. Looking at the sophisticated rococo motifs in gilding that cover the surfaces of this jug and basin, we see that those applied over the pink ground have fine lines of carmine and enamel edging. You can see them here. This technique would have prevented the discoloring of the pink ground in contact with the gilding. And visually, those darker accents give depth to the intricate decoration. Pink ground color attained a huge success and quickly became one of the most iconic colors of the Sèvres palette, even though its production declined in the 1760s. As we have seen with the yellow ground, in the 19th century, unscrupulous dealers populated the British market with pieces redecorated at a later stage. The patchy effect in this mustard pot stand is a sign of such practices. Sèvres artists got highly creative in the late 1750s and early 1760s and developed some additional decoration to be applied over the ground colors. One in particular was associated to pink grounds, the rose marble or marbled pink ground. It appeared in 1760 and lasted only 4 years. As one would expect from Sèvres, the application of a marbled ground was a rather complex process. Over the fired pink ground, blue enamel painting was applied in a cloud-like pattern, which, once dry, was delicately scraped away, revealing some of the pink underneath. Then, pebble-like carmine highlights or cailloux were added, and the piece had to be fired again. And we can see these blue cloud-like shapes, and here the carmine pebble-like shapes that were applied after. Finally, gilding was applied, here covering the surface left between the carmine pebbles and the blue cloud-like shapes. The pieces had to be fired once again at a much lower temperature, the gold mixture being highly volatile. The last step was polishing and tooling the gilded surfaces, in this case looking for a glistening sand-like finish known as sable. The fashion for rose marble porcelain was short-lived, but only 4 years sufficed for the artists of Sèvres to produce an imaginative variety of interpretations, from the cloud-like effect of the tea service we see here, to a more angular Chinese cracked ice pattern known as rose chine. It is found in a small group of vases fittingly decorated with scenes derived from Chinese sources, such as this cuvette à fleurs courtées in the Metropolitan Museum, and this pair of cuvettes Meissen in the British Museum. And you can appreciate how instead of cloud-like shapes in blue, you have quite angular shapes, which gives the name of cracked ice. The combination of blue and pink with gold highlights was hugely successful, and it is also found in other patterns during the same period. A cuvette Meissen at the Getty Museum combines a traditional trellis pattern at the front of the vase with a particularly squiggly or vermiculé marbled effect at the back. In 1763, an improved version of the original Bleu lapis ground color was introduced at Sèvres, the Bleu nouveau or new blue. As opposed to the mottled effect of the former, the new deep blue was even and consistent, qualities that earned it the appellation Beau Bleu, beautiful blue, from 1768. To obtain such a uniform effect, 3 layers of cobalt-based enamel were applied over the glaze with a thick brush known as queue de meurou or coat-tail. The resulting deep royal blue was perfectly suitable to decorate the new pieces created in the goût grec or Grecian taste, a new classical style in vogue during the 1760s. An imposing example is this vase, which is quintessentially neoclassical, with its decoration derived from Greek and Roman architecture. The alternating solid areas of blue, white, and gold create an elegant rhythm characteristic of this fashion. Inspired by Sèvres Bleu, Meissen produced a dark blue ground called Bleu turquoise that became popular in the late 18th century. An example of Meissen copying Sèvres Porcelain in the 1770s is this cream jug to the right, with a Bleu turquoise ground and cailloute or pebble-like gilded decoration, similar to that produced at Sèvres and appreciated in the vase to the left. A version of the Beau Bleu that we have just seen was the color known as Bleu fallu, named after its creator and painter, Jean-Armand Fallu. After applying the mordant and powdered color over a glazed pot, this was let to dry, and then the unfired ground color could be scraped away, revealing white patches where motifs could be painted in enamel colors, usually fruits and flowers, so that they seem to be painted directly over the blue ground instead of on the traditional white reserve. This technique is known as fleurs incrustées or encrusted flowers. The rich blue ground is often gilded with a pattern formed of circles of dots, with more dots inside, and is known as partridge eye or œil de persil. And here you can see how these flowers seem to be superimposed on the blue ground, but in fact the blue has been scraped away. That is the quality of this new color called Bleu fallu. This scraping technique is related to the rose madder ground we saw earlier. Both decorations were extremely work-intensive and expensive to produce, which contributed to their short-lived production. We are lucky to have 5 pieces decorated with this exquisite technique at the Wallace Collection. This pale turquoise blue, known as petit vert or little green, is the last soft paste porcelain ground color represented in the collection that we will be looking at today. This color appears in the Sèvres records between 1761 and 1763, and also in 1769. Again, another short-lived decoration dating to the early 1760s. And I just wanted to show you this cup and saucer because I think it's just the most beautiful decoration. And I think the petit vert, the little green decoration, works perfectly well with this trellis effect of swags and these other motifs. It has been suggested that the popularity of this color was encouraged by Madame de Pompadour's purchase of a 3-piece garniture comprising the 2 vases Potpourri à feuilles de myrte in the Walter's Art Gallery in the picture, and a clock in the Musée du Louvre. So let's now look at some examples of ground colors on hard paste porcelain, which was successfully produced at Sèvres from 1769, after kaolin was discovered in France, Limoges, some years earlier. Hard paste porcelain ground colors are applied over the glaze and fired porcelain, hence their name of overglaze colors. The powdered pigments are mixed with turpentine, a fluid that is obtained by the distillation of resin harvested from living trees, mostly pines, and resulting in a substance that has a consistency similar to honey, which allowed artists to apply enamel colors with a brush. Possibly the hard faced porcelain equivalent to the petit verre ground that we have just seen is this vert d'eau pâle or pale aquamarine green on the left. The ground color of the glaze is similar to the Chinese celadon porcelain on the right, a commodity that was highly appreciated in 18th-century France and that was usually mounted with gilt bronze. Chinese-inspired decoration on the covered bowl and plateau is known as Chinoiserie, a style at which the painter Louis-François Lecault excels, as seen in this example. Another painter that specialized on this type of decoration on hard-faced porcelain was Bleu. In this case, over a purple ground that was obtained by a precipitate of gold of cassius and tin. Artists at Sèvres developed in the 1780s this taste for chinoiserie decoration over a black enamel ground that tried to imitate the effect of Chinese lacquer. The blue-black pigment applied on these vases come from the mixing of oxides of iron, copper, cobalt, and manganese. It is applied in thick layers over the hard-faced porcelain, providing an even mirror-like surface over which the metallic decoration falls. I hope you have enjoyed this whistle-stop survey of the ground colors decoration in 18th century soft-faced porcelain at Sèvres and Vincennes. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward